Hello all! So I just saw Leatherface, the latest installment in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. I've reviewed every single other Texas Chainsaw film. I've been looking forward to this for about 2 straight years, so I might as well review this one. I'm a massive fan of the original film. It is amazing, and it's my #1 favorite horror film of all time. The series as a whole is kind of admittedly a mixed bag, but I wanted to see this mostly because the trailer made it look awesome. It sounded like it was taking a really different approach to the franchise, which I appreciated because most of the installments are just remakes of the first. And overall, it sounded kind of cool, so I was really looking forward to this. And I just saw it, so here's my review. Here's whether or not it's good or bad. Here's whether or not it lives up to the original film. Here's whether or not the fans should check it out. Here's my personal take. Now, if you check out my original review on the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I point out what made that movie so good was the mystery element. The fact that you didn't know why the family of cannibals were cannibals and why they were killing people. There was some things hinted at, a lot of different things suggested. You could figure it out for yourself, but you didn't really know. It was never stated. It was a big mystery. This, Leatherface, is supposed to be a prequel and explain the mystery, but the mystery is the best part of the original film, so doing that would kind of wreck the movie. So how are you supposed to do a prequel that's supposed to explain everything, but still keep what was good about the original intact? The director and scriptwriter's solution for this problem in the movie Leatherface is to fully and completely explain Leatherface's backstory and why he's a killer and why he does what he does, but to not explain why the family of cannibals are cannibals. Yeah, it completely explains Leatherface's backstory, but doesn't actually explain the family, why they kill people, why they are cannibals. It still keeps them completely in the dark. It tries to have the best of both worlds, in other words. Now, in order to do this, though, the scriptwriter and the director realized that they had to take Leatherface out of the family in order to do this story. Because if they kept him with the family, then they would have inevitably explained their backstory too. Oh, so they had to remove him and kind of put him on his own little adventure. And also, because this is supposed to be the story of how Leatherface becomes Leatherface, they had to introduce Leatherface as a completely different character who really seemed nothing like the character from the prior films and would slowly become Leatherface. And are you starting to see why this idea might have not actually worked? You have a character who's nothing like Leatherface at this point in a story that has nothing to do with a family of cannibals in order to keep them in the shadows, and yeah, you see the problem here. You see the big flaw in where this idea is going now. You see, the movie opens with the family of cannibals to establish them, and the movie ends with the family of cannibals to do a nice little wraparound and establish how Leatherface becomes Leatherface. The first 10 minutes relates to Texas Chainsaw Massacre as a result, and the last 10 minutes relates to Texas Chainsaw Massacre as a result, but the rest of the movie, 90% of it, relates to some guy that is nothing like Leatherface at this point, to the point where you don't even know which character is supposed to be Leatherface. It's a mystery. Going on an adventure that has nothing to do with the family of cannibals, and it's just a big side story. 90% of this movie, in other words, is nothing to do with Texas Chainsaw Massacre at all whatsoever. Zippo, zero, zilch. 90% of this movie. Just the first 10 minutes and the last 10 minutes are related to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. All the rest because of the knots that were tied around the scriptwriter's hands and how they were constraining themselves with what they wanted to do. As a result of those knots, none of the rest of the movie has anything to do with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It feels like a completely different film. It has a completely different filming style. It has different styles of characters. It has a plot all of its own that has nothing to do with anything. It is so detached that it feels like one of those Hellraiser direct-to-DVD movies where the script was originally a movie for a completely original film, and then they just slapped on Pinhead in one single page to link it, and that was it. You know, and Pinhead suddenly pops out of nowhere at the very end, seemingly out of the blue, and it seems really out of place. That's what this movie is. It feels like the first script had nothing to do with Leatherface or Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and then they just slapped on the Texas at the beginning, the first 10 minutes, and slapped on the Texas at the end in the last 10 minutes, and as a result, it feels like 90% of a movie that has nothing to do with the franchise and 10% of a movie that has a bit to do with the franchise. And that's the big problem here. If you're a fan of Texas Chainsaw Massacre and you were looking forward to this and you decide to check this out, you're going to be feeling like you were betrayed and lied to because this had nothing to do with anything, barely, of the franchise. Nothing to do with barely any of it. You're going to feel mistreated and betrayed a little bit, and as a result, I'm guessing a lot of fans are going to see this as the worst installment. Now that's a bit unfair because the mid portion, the 90% of this movie, isn't a bad movie. It's not horrible. It's not the worst thing I've ever seen, but it's not great either. There's nothing that really stands out. Everything's kind of just bland. The acting's all right. The sets are all right. The gore is all right. It's kind of up there. It's not nearly as high as Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3D, but it's all right. Everything's kind of just middle ground. You know, nothing really stands out. Nothing really grabs you. And every now and then, this 90% of the film does try to be really disturbing to shock the viewer, but it feels like the scriptwriter just threw it in there to shock the viewer. It doesn't really fit plot-wise or story-wise. It just comes out of nowhere and just randomly happens and just feels like the scriptwriter was like, are you disturbed yet? Are you disturbed yet? And as a result, it feels very cheap and out of place, and it doesn't actually feel disturbing at all. There will be some spoilers. Let's go spoil this thing, because it was, like I said, middle ground, and if you're a fan of the franchise, you'll probably hate it. So I don't mind spoiling it. But this group of killers who escape from this mental asylum, as it were, they find a dead body, and they out of the blue decide to have sex with it. No real reason is given. It doesn't really make any sense. But hey, it's really disturbing and shocking, so they have sex with the dead body. It's solely put in there to be disturbing, and it feels really, really cheap and out of place. And as a result, it doesn't work at all. It's literally like one frame of film, and it's just completely pointless. They never even bring it up again. So yeah, every now and then it just feels like it's shocking for shock's sake, so it doesn't really work at all. And everything else about the 90% of this movie is pretty bland. It's all pretty middle ground. Nothing really grabs you. This is a movie I'm probably going to forget about after 2 weeks. But what about the 10%? What about the parts that are actually like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the opening and the ending? Well, the cool thing about this, as I said, it doesn't actually explain why the family of cannibals are cannibals. Instead, it actually, like the original, hints at different suggestions, but doesn't actually state what it is. This one slightly hints, and I mean like very slightly, hints that they might not be a family at all, but actually a cult. Which is a really interesting idea. There's this line of dialogue at one point where the police officer that's investigating the crimes walks up to the mother of Leatherface, and he's like, oh, you're their mother, aren't you? Or are you their aunt? Oh, you're probably both. And the way it's said, it's insinuating inbreeding, but you could also read it as him insinuating they're not really related. So it's kind of a double entendre, double comment, and that was cool. So there's some slight hints that might actually not be a family at all, but a cult, which is kind of interesting. That was an interesting idea. Also, the explanation that they do give for Leatherface, for why Leatherface is Leatherface, I liked. It was a good explanation, and it makes a lot of sense, actually. But here's the rub. It only makes sense if you've only seen the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It doesn't actually make sense with the rest of the films. I wouldn't expect it to. This franchise has the worst continuity ever. By remembering some of the making of comments, interviews when this was coming out, they were saying it was directly related to the first film, Texas Chainsaw, and was directly related to Texas Chainsaw 3D. I'm pretty sure Texas Chainsaw 3D has a couple lines of dialogue that would contradict the events in this movie. pretty heavily, and they don't actually fit together well at all. So this only really fits with the first film, but I wouldn't expect it to fit with all the films because, as I said, they have no continuity. Half the movies in this franchise is just remakes of the original. So yeah, it's a good backstory though for Leatherface. If you just watched it and the original, the backstory makes a lot of sense, and I actually really dig it. But as I've kind of suggested, the backstory only comes about in the last 10 minutes. So even though it's really interesting, it's only 10 minutes of a film. You know, it's only 10% of a film is the backstory, and the rest is just this group of people on the run from an insane asylum that go on a bit of a killing spree. And that story could have worked. It could have been better than bland, but it needed a really good lead to kind of carry the film for the viewers to get behind. And they have that with the main woman character, with the nurse character. I don't even remember her name, but that's the problem. They never flush this character out. You have no idea what her even name is. I barely remember it. You have no idea anything about it. She doesn't have any scene on her own dedicated to fleshing her out. She's a non-character, and everything she does is just a reaction to what happens to her. She's completely reactionary, and as such, she doesn't really work, and as such, she doesn't really care the film, and as such, it kind of feels just bland. So, that's really all there is to say about it. It's so bland, it's almost forgettable. It is forgettable. And it has so little to do with the other Texas Chainsaw Massacres. Like, I realize they don't have much to do with each other because their continuity sucks. But it has nothing, like I said, the only time it feels like one of the films is in the opening and the end. So if you're a fan, you're going to feel betrayed. If you're not a fan, you might like it a little bit, but it's so bland you probably won't really dig it that much. I think I'll give it a 6 out of 10 because some of the practical makeup effects were well done. But this is really not worth anyone's time. This has an interesting backstory for Leatherface, but it's, like I said, it's only 10 minutes of the movie, so it's so little. You could just put that as a special feature on one of the DVDs of one of the other films. Like, if you include that as a special feature in the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and you're like, this is actually the backstory we came up with, that would be fine. That would serve the same purpose, and you'd actually have more fun watching it. So I think this movie might have actually worked if the whole movie revolved around the family, given Leatherface the same backstory, but had him not been put in an insane asylum and gone on his own random adventure, have him in the family, build up and more hints that's a cult, do the same backstory, because it really has nothing to do with him going on his own adventure. You could still make that backstory work in the family. All they have to do is kidnap a random character and have him come to like that character and respect that character and question whether or not he wants to be a part of the family, and then you still have that same backstory. So it still works. You don't have to do the separate adventure at all. I get why they did it. I kind of explained why they did it in the start of my review, but that doesn't justify it. It still resulted in a kind of crummy film that has a good opening, alright ending, but a very bland middle. So 6 out of 10 if you are a fan of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Avoid this, because it has nothing to do barely with those films. If you're a fan of horror in general, read the plot synopsis, and if you think it sounds cool, check it out. But you're probably going to find it just all right. If you're holding some kind of horror movie marathon, then sure, what the hey. But it's only a 6 out of 10, and I wouldn't say go out and pay $10 on it like it is right now for streaming. It's not really worth it. But that's just my take. If you loved it, I'd love to hear your review. It's been getting mostly mixed reviews from what I see, and I can tell why. But in any case, I hope you did enjoy it if you got stuck watching it, and cheers.